Welcome. Grab a cup of tea and enjoy the talk. Sound symbolism in the Turkish tongue.
But what's sound symbolism and iconicity, as it's sometimes known? What was the inspiration for my study? What was my study itself? What did I do? What results did I get? And then it's time to put on your thinking caps because it's time to discuss together, and then I'll take your questions. Okay. At the beginning of linguistics, the sort of foundation of professional linguistics, it was decided that words are arbitrary, right? That form and meaning, they have a sort of arbitrary relationship established by convention. That was the dominant view, and to some extent still is, although a growing number of people disagree. However, some words may be iconic, that is, non-arbitrary, or have something of the meaning contained within the sounds of the words, or indeed the shape of the hands in signed modalities. So I'll give you an example from Japanese. There's an idiophone, or some allegedly some symbolic depiction word, doki, and this word means excited but nervous. You would use it maybe you're queuing for a roller coaster, or you're going on a first date, or seeing a horror film, right? And so you're excited, but you're also nervous. To imply that, you would say, I'm doki. But why does it mean that? Is there a motivation? Yes, say Japanese speakers, it's because it mirrors the heartbeat, right? So it's the beat of the heart in that situation, right? So there's a motivated meaning form mapping. Whereas a word like tree, if I point out the window and I say there's a tree over there, okay, because you all understand English, you know I'm talking about the wooden thing with branches and leaves, etc., right? But in German it's Baum, in Dutch it's Boom, etc. Boom and Baum are related, but only by historical coincidence. But what's Bohm-like or tree-like about a tree? Nothing, most people would say. So there we have this kind of opposition. But these words like doki are a whole class in many languages, not just Japanese. They're a class of marked words that depict sensory imagery. And they're said, as I said, to be non-arbitrary, which is an empirical question, I think. They were examined for decades in fieldwork in Africa, where they were called Ideophones, East Asia, where they were called mimetics, Southeast Asia, and also even South America. So you have this trend emerging, but a new one would emerge as well. That's lab work. So sort of semi-fieldwork, like a Gestalt psychologist named Köhler goes in the 1920s to Tenerife, and he brings with him some shapes, right? So you see here, if you see my pointer, my cursor, there's this sort of amoeboid shape and this jagged shape, right? And he says, okay, my good people, one of these is maluma and the other is taquete. Which one's which? And he had a bunch of these shapes and a bunch of these sort of pseudo words, names that he gave them, and asked people to assign to one or the other. And he found that, okay, more often than not, people see the amoeboid one and they say, that's maluma. And they see the sort of jagged one and they say, that's taquete. This was done and he said, okay, great. There's some sort of form meaning mapping. Good. Then later, Ramachandran and Hubbard, and lots of subsequent research after, rebrand this as Kiki Booba effect. Similar idea. Okay, one's Kiki, one's Booba, which one's which? Also with a whole host of other names and shapes. And, as it says in Spanish here, which one's Kiki, which one's Booba? People will say, okay, amoeboid, Booba, jagged, Kiki. There have been some studies which have found no effect, but most of them were like, okay, this is a trend, and the round one is Booba. And people started suggesting, okay, it's the roundness of the lips, Booba, etc. Right? Kiki, the sharp contours and the sharp sound waves hitting your ears, etc. Lots of theories were put forward as to why that may be the case. These studies are fantastic. They continue to be done, and they're super valuable. But what does it say about language? Harder to tell. So we need these two parallel trends to really intersect a lot, this lab work and this field work. And this was done by my supervisor, Mark Dingemonster. With colleagues in 2016, he designed a two-way forced choice task in which 203 of these ideophones, of these words like doki, like the example I gave, were taken from 5 languages. They got 82 Dutch participants to indicate the correct meaning of the idiophone, right? Two-way forced choice, so correct, incorrect meaning. and they gave it to them with sort of alterations to prosody and other things. In their words, in an attempt to break the iconicity, right? How far could they push the effect? So I found this study really interesting. I then went a slightly different route. I said, okay, I'm going to take one language, Turkish, very well described language, loads of ideophones, as have been described, but not so much heavy on, say, lab work or these kind of studies. So I decided, I'm not so interested in whether the prosody affects it or not for this study. I'm just going to expand the choices they have. So instead of 2, now we have 4. Because, when we talk to people, it's not like we see a list of options before us, of course. So maybe more options would make it slightly more naturalistic. So what did I do? So I got Ideophones, and I gave it to native Turkish speakers as a pretest to say, which Ideophones do you use? Do you know the definition of? Because the thing about Ideophones is they are very spontaneous sometimes, and they can be created on the spot. So I wanted to see, okay, which ones are a bit more conventionalized. So I got this list, and I whittled it down to the top 20, as I sort of found that Turkish speakers would accept them as real words, and they knew the meaning. So top 20, I then designed a Qualtrics survey, as you can see on the right, and I gave these 20 stimuli to 128 native English-speaking participants. There were some bi or multilinguals, but they were all native. So that was my criterion. So as you see, the Qualtrics survey on the right here, there's an audio file, which you can see here. They would not see the audio file, they would merely hear it. And it was played once, and then it would disappear, not only from view, but you couldn't even click on it. So there was no chance of repeating the idiophone. They get it once. Every participant, one trial, as it were. 4 options, no fixed order. You can see here, for instance, expresses a strong taste, expresses a mild taste, noisy chatting, etc. And one of these options is correct. It is the agreed upon definition. Another I made up is the opposite of that correct definition. Then there are 2 more, a totally semantically unrelated option, which I called foil 1, and then the opposite of that foil 1. Again, it's a bit hard to create opposites in this case, so that could have skewed the data a little bit, but I felt that was the most logical thing to do in that case. If you're interested, I can send you my full appendix, and you can take me to task on the definitions I created. Okay, now it's your turn. So the trial worked. Hopefully this will work again. I'm going to click on the audio file. You'll all hear it. And in your heads, I want you to play along. And in the Q&A, we can discuss what you guessed. So you have these 4 options before you. Now you're playing one of my participants in this role. I'm going to play it now.
Shak, shak.
Hopefully you heard that. So you would get that once, shak, shak, right? And then you would choose the option. Oops,
Shak, shak.
again. Here we go. So what are the chances that people actually correctly indicate the meaning of these ideophones? They do quite well, actually. But you see that there's a lot of interference here, right? The foils and the opposites also, they're not non-existent in this graph, right? So let's go into a bit more detail. You have this dotted line, on level. And what do you see? You see a huge mosaic, right? A huge mosaic of choices, of indications, of guesses, if you will. Interesting, but let's go one by one. Okay, so the correct meaning, you see there's an obvious trend here. People choose the correct meaning more often than not, right? In some cases, incredibly high, right? Bonga bonga, super high, 81.9%. But some people, some items, it's only 19%-ish, which is not very high. So you see the full spectrum, but you see a definite trend towards choosing the correct meaning. How about the opposite? Okay, mosaic starts to appear again, but you see that often less than chance. Although, notable exceptions. Some noise in the data. Okay, foil 1. Yeah, but similar to the opposite. Foil 2. Okay, mosaic has returned, right? So whilst there's a clear trend in the correct meaning, the trends are less clear for the non-correct meanings, shall we say. What are these trends and what are they coincidence? So some items were highly guessable, highly correctly indicated. But look at the top ones. Bonga bonga, ung spot, dessert. These have English equivalents, actually. Bonga bonga, bang. It's a loud commotion, can also refer to music. Banging tune, a loud bang. It's It's not identical, but it's not that far apart. Pat, to pat. We have this in English, to hit with a flat object. Virtually identical form and meaning. Is it because they're both iconic? Is it because one's a loan word from the other? Unlikely, but what's going on here? You see, there are lots of potential explanations, and this study can't answer that. We have to think about that. Zonk, zonk. This one's a bit of a stretch, but we have this expression in English, to be zonked out, which is like totally spacing out, daydreaming, etc. In Turkish, zonk zonk is a throbbing headache. Also a bit of a stretch, but it sounds rather like sizzle. You see there's a lot of overlap in the sound of the word, and it basically means to sizzle, right? So again, coincidence or not, hard to tell. And yet we also have a lot of mess in the data towards the bottom of the graph, as I showed before. So what's going on here? Correct and incorrect are guessed basically at the same rate. I'm actually not sure. I've tried to look at the phonetics of the words and see if there's any kind of pattern. I haven't been able to find one yet. Again, happy to send my my data, my appendices, and see if someone else has a better idea than I do about it. Yeah, exactly. Here are all the reasons why this could be quite messy. So did I operationalize iconicity? I would like to think so, but at the end of the study, I'm not convinced, actually. I have some more than healthy skepticism around my own results. It also has to be said that, of course, I took the easy option of me being a native English speaker. I tested native English speakers online on Qualtrics. English speakers are humans, but they're certainly not humanity, right? And are very overused in studies, as the weird whole trend towards describing Westerners as weird has indicated. It's a very small subset in the data of human variation. So we must take it with a healthy serving of salt. There's also this issue of multilingualism, right? Some of these people speak other languages as a native language. I ruled out any Turkic language. You were not allowed to participate if you spoke Turkish or Kazakh or Azeri or anything like that. But hey, there were loads of people who grew up, maybe the children of Indian immigrants to native English-speaking countries like the UK, etc., and they spoke Hindi, for instance. I had a few Hindi speakers. They have an idiophone, jaldi jaldi, which is almost identical in meaning and very similar in form to halder halder in Turkish. So again, is that creating some noise? They're not so numerous, but you saw every little percentage kind of helps to create this trend. Lots to think about. That raises the question, how would this look like if we used other languages that were rich in ideophones instead of English? Or what about even other Turkic languages? What is the sort of ecology of iconicity within a family, right? Turkic languages are very similar across the board. It's a very close-knit family, actually. Are ideophones totally understandable between Turkish and Kazakh, or whatever, Tuvan and Azeri? We don't know, but that would be a great way to sort of further get a handle on what's actually going on here. What does it mean to have an idiophone? What does it mean for human communication, for semiotic affordances? And I don't know if we know that from the current literature, or at least I'm not convinced. So you need to take it with historical linguistics, cultural evolution, more description in the field, lab studies, etc. And I already talked about this. But here's an idea for another study. We know also from Arsenal's talk about the rich multimodality of human interactions linguistically. Ideophones are sort of the closest thing we can get to gestures in the spoken modality. But they also appear with gestures, right? So what could you do? You could maybe design a study whereby gestures and ideophones are sort of paired with each other. You could guess an idiophone from the gesture or vice versa and see if there were any effect. To my knowledge, this has not been done, but again, if someone knows, please correct me. So I think there's a really fruitful collaboration that can go on between these two, not only the two fields of fieldwork and lab work, but also, gesture, ideophones, and create a, complete sort of, as I said, sort of semiotic ecology of human communication. And I think that the time is right to do just that. So my closing remarks. So we've heard in this conference and others, and in the news in general, about the Kiki Buba bootstrapping proto-language theory, whereby modal associations were the impetus for proto-words. Really interesting. We also know that synesthesia is associated with a sort of neotenous suite of traits, the retention of juvenile traits into adulthood. And some people think that babies are basically born with synesthesia and grow out of it. Not everyone, but some people. And some people say, okay, sound symbolism may be related to self-domestication, which is also about neoteny and also about juvenile characteristics in adulthood. Humans are quite neotenous, and that's been the trend in human evolution towards more neoteny. Not in a linear fashion, right? Not always, but overall, if we were to look at it from our perspective here and the beginning, quote unquote, from the split with other apes, you know, the chimpanzee bonobo line, there's been a trend towards neoteny. So are we to say then that proto-language evolved out of this kind of neotenous suite of traits? Quite likely, could have happened. But is that then a primitive feature? Arguably not, actually. It's arguably something that should increase over time. And if it doesn't, then we have a problem, and that's something to really investigate. So, to wrap up, you know, Asla in the last talk said, not only the past, but the future is likely to be multimodal. I would say to that, I agree. And not only the past, but the future is likely to be iconic. With that, I have some references, some acknowledgements, and please take me to task with your questions. Thank you very much.
Oh hi, you're still there. Great, like and subscribe while you're here, and, well, see you next time. Ciao.